This is Sophia's Start Drop. This isn't exactly an easy subject to talk about. However, I figured enough time has passed, and I believe that I'm somewhat ready to tackle this subject by the name it actually deserves. For the sake of the video, I'm not going to mention any names. I'm just going to mention what I went through and how I went through it, and a couple of things that, happened. As a heads up, this video is going to be very difficult to hear if you're sensitive to dark subjects, and yeah, I think it's time to talk about that thing. I often don't like to talk about my past too much. I'm recently starting to open up thanks to this little channel of mine, the side channel, and most of it is because I don't really have many, nice things to talk about. But if this information reaches anyone, I hope they can use it in a way that helps them personally. Because the title of this video is not clickbait. I genuinely believe I survived a cult, and as such, I want to give my experience, since the mental image many people have of cults is something a little different to the new era of cults, let's say. Whenever someone thinks of cults, they think of this religious god creature that everyone has to obey to, and they do weird rituals and all that stuff. There's a different kind of cults nowadays. Cults that can be online, physical, and that don't even have God sometimes. Maybe you've heard about it, but there was a cult in the English community. But the English art community, this is the only name I'm going to mention, mostly for reference sake. I believe it was called DICE. I didn't do a lot of research information, but it's one of those things that, cults can come in different ways. And even when they don't come from the traditional way people think of, they're still very dangerous. The way that many cults start by getting their victims, let's say, because that's a proper name, is usually they search for people who are having a very bad time in their lives, people who are often young and naive, or if not, people who believe that they don't really have anything more to live for. I was both. When this happened, I was very young. I was still having teen on my age, so this happened was very, very young. Well, not so much, but you know what I mean. I felt like I was at a point in my life where I simply didn't have anything else to do. I felt like everyone hated me and that there was simply no place for me in the world. You would find that people who often end up in things like this have a very similar mindset. The kind of mindset that I have nothing else to give, so what would they take from, That kind of mindset. I used to know the guy that was partially in charge of everything in that place. He did a lot of things I didn't know before I even came to talk to him. It was everything very new. It was only a couple of years old, that community in particular. And this guy was often seen as kind of like the voice of reason, very charming kind of person. And yeah, how could you not trust someone who everyone seems to trust? And there were other things why I trusted him. One of those things is that even before that, I was groomed, I'm not going to hide that, by someone else from many years ago. This happened when I was 14, I believe. Well, I won't talk about that very much, but I did fall in love with someone who was essentially grooming me for several years. Eventually, I woke up of it, but I always had this feeling that my only true love was the one guy who did that to me. Obviously, that's very horrible to think or say, but it was the truth. This guy, this person who managed his cult, was someone who kind of reminded me of this groomer person. However, in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe I can rewrite my own trauma and turn this new person into someone who won't abuse me. Funny how that turned out. Please don't do ever that again. If you've ever been through something so horrible like that, then don't do that. Don't think that. Don't try to heal your trauma by trying to replace that bad memory with something nice. because you could often end with people who tried to hurt you and take advantage of that. This guy knew what I went through, and I believe he knew about the feelings I had for him based on this like correlation of maybe making things better. I remember the first time that he talked to him, it wasn't a very flirtatious way. He was saying like, a sweet like you shouldn't be so sad or something like that. He was always kind of like giving me like love bombing me and then just not talking to me at all. He would make me feel special and then just not give me anything. It was kind of like that for about a year since I met him, approximately. He seemed to have a large group of friends and he seemed to be this kind of popular guy that everyone trusted. So, I felt safe. I remember the day that I talked to him. I was feeling very bad. I was depressive. I had very low self-esteem and didn't have any kind of hope for things becoming better. So I just talked to him. I vented to him. I just wanted him to be there for me because I care for him. Instead of, maybe telling me something like, oh, that's too bad, the kind of thing that friends would do when they hear one of their friends vent. Or maybe if he didn't want to deal with me, he could just say, oh, maybe this is not something I can deal with right now. Maybe you should talk to someone else. Something that sounds like someone in the right mind would say. Like maybe if it's too much, just say you should talk with like a personal friend or something. No, he said, hey, it seems like you could change your life. How about you join my group? Back at the day, it was disguised as a job. He said that I should join the job, that they had the perfect opportunity for me. And then the job account posted something that kind of left me froze. It was an opportunity to, recreate something that was already done before. For context's sake, this job position required me to have a new identity. If you know anything about cults, it's that the thing they attack you the most is your identity. You have to be a part of the group and you cannot question this. This was already something that was taken by someone else before, but it was someone else who was attacked by everyone saying that she was a bad person. This identity had a different person behind it before. A girl who was labeled as a scammer, who owed money to people, who was very narcissistic and a liar, and everything that she said was a lie and all that stuff. The typical constellation, let's say. The typical drama, controversy you see on the internet, well, she had all that. That's what she was accused of. And because so many people seemed to believe it was, so many content channels would say she was this and she was that, you would just believe it. They had many pieces of evidence that seemed to point that in that direction, so how could you not believe it? So he told me that I would be given the opportunity to do that thing, but do it right. That I was perfect for the position. And, well, since I told myself that I had nothing to give, then, well, sure, why not? I was put inside of a group with other people who were just like me. Most of them were women. Inside this group, I talked with a lot of them. And I learned quite a number of things. Most of us came from a very similar background, in the sense that we felt like we had nothing to lose, that maybe this was the opportunity for lives, and many of them said that this group was like the family. Now, if you don't know about cults again, it's very common that cults will often tell you that we're like a family. That's why I often get triggered whenever a work tells me, oh, we're like family. No, we're not. We're not a family. I'm here to provide a service. That's it. But yeah, you will often find that cults often do this whole family thing. It was not very good, and I know by the fact that a lot of those girls had very complicated lives before this point. At first everything was okay. I was love bombed again. I was told that this new identity was me, that I was perfect, that I didn't have to change anything about me because I was already this new identity. Now, obviously at first I was very flustered, I guess you could say. I it just made me feel special. And you will learn later that this was not a very good thing to feel. This is coming a little bit up in the story, but they would not stop calling me by the new identity they gave me. Even when I asked to be called by my real name, they refused to, and they said that I had to adapt to my new persona because that is me. In case you don't know this, a lot of cults do this as a way to maintain control. They created this identity that they're giving to me, and if I'm that identity, that means that I'm under their control. That's usually how it works. Everything started to be nice, but I did find some things that made me uncomfortable. But at the same time, I just tolerated them because back in the day, those things were a lot more normalized to me. One of the many things was the way that this guy that I talked to was awfully sexual with one of the workers, the supposed workers, one of the girls. He would send a not safe for work of a character to her, and she was like, why are you sending me this? This is weird. I did learn eventually that a lot of things happen in private. He would even create pictures, like, those AI generated pictures of very young characters in very weird positions, if you know what I mean. It was also very apparent that you had to earn some of that approval. I remember one of the girls was constantly seen playing online games with the bosses, and they would often give her some extra kind of appreciation and pretty much extra credit for all the stuff she did, as long as she spent more time with them, personal time. In my case, I was very excited about this new opportunity. They gave me a contract, and I was even working before this contract. They were keeping me working before this contract. However, even after the contract, I can fully say now that the contract was a lie. Pretty much, by the laws of my country, a lot of things need to happen for an online work contract to be legal. Those rules and things that are put in place for protection they were not really taken into consideration. They were not applied for my own safety. The contract itself was very dubious. It didn't include almost any responsibility about the leaders, I guess you could say. It contained nothing. It just told me things that I should be doing. And even the responsibilities they did had, such as payments, were not completed from the supposed company. No, they were more interpersonal exchanges of money. The accounts that supposedly were going to pay me didn't pay me, but instead pay me through personal accounts, which is actually illegal in my country. I'll talk about it later. A lot of stuff happened after that. Looking back at it, none of that was okay from the get-go, but I was already so used to people kind of treating me like that I guess I just found it to be normal. I didn't really thought that I deserved any kind of respect, so pretty much anything that anyone would do to me was fine. Now, I do have a lot of things going on mentally. I don't mean just mental illnesses, but actual conditions, I guess you could say. The one that I'm most open and willing to talk about is always my autism and ADHD, but there were other things that I did suffer, and even nowadays I still have to deal with, especially my anxiety tics. I don't really know how to explain them, but every time that I'm extremely stressed out or anxious, I start having very violent tics, and it's often a sign of my body that I should be relaxing. They start after another events that I don't want to talk about right now. But the point is that even back then, I was with special medication for me. Nowadays, I can't take that medication, mostly because I have a more physical condition at the moment. It's a health-related condition that is telling me that I shouldn't take those kinds of medications. And let's just say that my current physical condition requires me to not take those particular medication, at least for the time being. I'm sorry if I ramble a bit too much into that. I did tell my superiors that I was under medication, that I was taking care of myself, and one of the reasons why I was actively looking for jobs, I had different jobs at the time, is that I needed to pay for my own stuff, my own medication. Even with this, they chose to organize an event that had alcohol involved. In case you don't know, mental health medication should never be mixed with alcohol for a number of reasons. Not only does bad for the body, but even psychologically it can really mess you up. While they did say at some point that if I didn't want to, I shouldn't drink alcohol, I was put into a situation where everyone around me was drinking alcohol, everyone was having fun, and I felt pressure to drink alcohol. It was social pressure. On top of that, I'm socially anxious, and this party was supposed to be a celebration of the newcomers. This is, again, very normalized acts in cults, that they make this celebration for the new members of this amazing family. Well, they did that for us too. And everyone was having fun, and I couldn't because, I'm autistic, I'm very socially anxious. So I decided to join in and drink the alcohol, mostly because I felt like everyone was doing it and I was the one killing the party because I wasn't doing it. I did say a lot of things that I didn't like under the influence of alcohol. I wasn't really fully in control of myself. They took this and they held it up in my head, saying that I was a bad person, that I was so unstable because I did this, and they were constantly making me feel guilty even years later. I believe that I deserved it, so I just took it and, just continued. A lot of things happened from in and out. They wanted to convince me to move into a different location. I was having a lot of very stressed moments in the location I used to live in, mostly by the people around me. So they claimed that they wanted to save me, they wanted to help me because they had this big location that they wanted to make me live in because they're so good and they just want to help me. Something that they didn't mention even nowadays is that they wanted to charge me from that location. So they wanted to take even more from what they already took from my salary as a way to allow me to live with them, to just save my life and escape that situationship. Luckily, I didn't accept it, and I'm very glad I didn't. Many other things happened, and one of them was the exclusion of other people in my life. This is very typical in cults, if you know anything, that they tell you that you cannot tell friends or family what you're working on, what you're doing, where you're spending your time. They isolate you from other people, and all you need is your new family, the family they have in your group. This group is everything you need. They did that to me too. And one of the worst times was when I decided to spend some quality time with one of my friends, a girlfriend I had. I just wanted to spend some time with her, have some fun. But as soon as the leaders got to know what was happening, that I told this girl about my job, I said about the group, that I told them that I was related to that job position. They immediately cut everything off and they separated me from her. They were telling me that she was a monster, that she was a bad person, that they make sure that she would never do anything again in her life. They were pretty much threatening me that they would try to take any opportunity she had away from achieving anything she wanted. She wanted to be an artist, and they said that they had contacts with people that they would try to make her go down the drain as easy, that she would never rise. At some point, I had a mental breakdown and I switched my personality. This was something that happened to me a lot back in the day. I dissociated so much that I had this alternate persona of me to take my place as a way to cope at the moment. This lasted, I believe, for around 5 minutes. This whole breakdown thing where, in fact, I don't think it lasted even 5 minutes. It lasted around 2, where this other me just decided to front, I guess, just And I was dissociating at that point. I don't think. I believe that it was just between 2 to 5 minutes at most, maybe even less. Where, after being insulted, I was just out of myself. They did hold this over my head again, saying that I was so unstable and so bad and that everything was my fault. But yeah, after many of those things, it also happened that during this time I had a couple romantic encounters with some people. One of the leaders, the one that got me into this whole group thingy, was very jealous of anyone I dated. Not only me, but anyone who dated the other girls. He was also very jealous of them and would often tell the girls very nasty things about them so they would stop dating. I was sadly always the most honest one. I've been always the type of person to just speak what I think, and I've always been a little bit confrontational. So yeah, it was often me the one that got into like into the most discussions in, I just want to do something and I want to be this and I want to be that, but they often shut me down. They shut down a lot of my ideas. A lot of those ideas I did them anyways because I knew it would be better and I just wanted to keep supporting the group and my job. Many of those things that I did that were supposedly inside of the job, which had a contract that was not even valid, are things that I was never paid for. In fact, I made the calculations of the things that I used my own money to pay for the job position, and just adding everything up, the total amount of just the things I used my own money to pay are over $1,000. And if you add all the job that I actually did that went unpaid, like my own job, it's over $2,000. They still owe me that, and I don't think I'll ever see that money anytime soon. But anyways, I did start to get increasingly frustrated at the fact that I couldn't do anything. And one of the things that really made me start working on my own stuff was an event. I just talked with one of my friends, and apparently I just said too many personal information. People said that the leaders said that they wanted to protect me, quote unquote. Therefore, I shouldn't say anything about me or who I am. And this granted me apparently to not being able to work for an entire month where I simply wouldn't be able to get any real money. Obviously I got very upset at this, most because I needed the money to take care of me. Top of that, I never really made a lot of money on that job. The most I remember making were like $300 at most, and it was often between $100 and $300. It was said that they took some very small percentage of the payment. However, many other girls reported being taken over 50% of the payment. I don't know if that's true. I didn't see it for myself, and I didn't really have many access of how much money I was actually making, so I don't know I don't know how much I was really making. The point is that I really, really needed to keep supporting my own mental health medicine, and on top of that, I was also in college. I entered college very young, and I needed to pay for my own transportation and food. As such, I started a side project as a way to support myself. Something that this cult really did is that they would constantly telling you that you are a character, that you are not yourself, you're a caricature. But at the same time, they would say that the caricature is you, so it's confusing. It was always confusing. They always went back and forth about it. They claimed that it was just a character, but then they would refuse to call you by your real name even when you asked. So, it's the thing about power. I did get my own identity very messed up in all of that because I didn't know if I was a character, if I was me, if I was anything, if I was nothing. So I just made another character. Anything that, made sense to me. My identity was smashed and thrown to the floor, so I just made something that kind of made me feel comfortable. I found success in this character, and that's something they didn't like. I was having a good day, and the leaders decided to speak to me and tell me that I was suddenly out, that they wouldn't give me anything else, that I was simply out, that I deserved everything bad that had happened to me, and that I was a horrible human being that should feel ashamed of myself. That's what they told me, and I just got everything. I didn't get to do anything. Obviously, for many months, I felt like everything was my fault. There were other things that were happening in the background, specifically a side group of friends that was not really kind of friend, but was also inside of the group, but not exactly inside of the group. It was very confusing. I was motivated by the cult leader to just talk to them to get things right. And, they were in, but they were out, and it was very confusing overall. Things were bad enough, but they didn't get enough. They just got worse as time went on. Mostly because at some point everything exploded. The cult leaders really started to show their ugly faces at that point. They were constantly... I learned later that they were constantly threatening the other women, saying that they had eyes everywhere and that everyone will tell them if they did something wrong. Which, sounds creepy enough as it is. But there are other things. They hold this huge financial bubble. I wasn't the only person they owed money to. In fact, they owed money to everyone. One of the most disgusting things that I find personally that they did is that one of their victims needed a health operation. She had a cyst to her throat, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if it was a cyst or if it was something else, but she needed to get something out of her throat, or else she would not be able to speak anymore. She would potentially be disabled. She would be mute. What this cult did is that they claimed that because she was theirs, all that money then belonged to theirs, and they're just being so kind to allow her to use some of that money for her operation. Not only this, but even after everything exploded, they still tried to claim the money as theirs. They tried to go into the pages that were helping the girl gain that money just to take it out of her so they could steal the money for her care and aftercare operation. Like, she was supposed to get an operation and she needed also money for the aftercare sessions. So, to put it simply, they were willing to put a woman at risk of being permanently disabled for greed. That's the kind of people I dealt with. And while I know this may sound unbelievable, that's not even everything they did. But after this point, I believe it's a bit too much for me to talk about. Everything that I just said is just part of everything. There's even a larger story going on with the first girl who had the identity, but even I feel a bit too sick to talk about it. As it is now, I decided to do some research on cult survivors and what they went through, and I did realize that a lot of the things I went through are normal to feel. Especially feeling like you have a lack of self-identity or that you have problem taking decisions. Now, if you heard all of this, you would probably think that, you would never fall for something like that. But in reality, I also thought that I would never fall for something like that and did, and I just still did. Many cults are never really even referred to as cults. The cults that are referred to as cults are very little and they're far in between. You could be entering a cult without even knowing it. There's many of them. Not just in this kinds of stuff, but for example, the typical do your trip for a spiritual liberation. Those are often also cults. They often do drugs. And there's many of them everywhere. The magical crystals that will take your stress away just for a modest price, and it's very cheap for everything they truly provide you. There's many things, and they often don't come from people who are unknown to you. They come from friends, people who gain your trust. As such, if any of these things sound like something you went through or something that you could be potentially falling to, or maybe a friend that is going through something like that, I recommend to just send them this video, or to just learn yourself about what cults really are, how they work, and how to avoid them. There's even more things than the ones I just talked about. For example, the leaders would constantly call themselves this kind of god that was constantly just managing everyone, and no one would ever reach everything if it wasn't for them. They would constantly treat themselves as this like magical god that if it wasn't for them and their geniuses, no one would ever achieve anything. The entire world should be surrounded and bowing to them. Sometimes I wonder if I'm stupid for falling for stuff like that. But the mere fact that I found other survivors that I could talk to makes me feel like it's just a thing that could happen to anyone, and therefore no one is truly able to avoid it unless you know the things very early on. The most meaningful experiences are often the ones that someone near to you went through or someone you yourself went through. And if I can avoid anyone to go through something similar to what I did, I'll just feel good about it. All I can do now is share my experience. I don't want people to actively look up what I went through or any names or anything. Please respect my privacy and what I really feel okay sharing. Again, there's more layers to this story, but for now, that's all I really feel comfortable sharing. I'm sorry if none of my videos are being happy, but I believe that I'm doing myself a favor by just speaking about these things, calling them by the name that they are, and trying to not be scared, because I wasn't at fault. Even if I was maybe someone compulsive or even a bad person, being a bad person or not doesn't mean that you're any more or less of a victim. That's just something completely unrelated that it seems like the internet often forgets. You can be a bad person and still be a victim. And I'm trying to believe that I'm a good person, but even if I'm not, that doesn't take away my experience. That's about it for now. I hope you get something out of this, or if not, just a fun story or not so fun story to hear in the background. That's about it for now. Goodbye.